The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, and in all that time, they had never met a species quite like humanity. The elder races watched from their crystal towers and gas giant palaces as these strange bipeds spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, and they did not like what they saw. Humans were loud and messy and hungry for everything they could get their hands on. And worst of all, they refused to know their place in the natural order of things. Ambassador Kethvos of the Veth Dominion stood before the great council chamber and let light refract through his crystalline body in patterns of deep concern as he addressed the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. Something must be done about the human problem, he said, and his voice rang like bells in the vast space. They have colonized 17 worlds in 300 years and show no signs of stopping. The representative a vast cloud of sentient gas contained within a pressure sphere rumbled its agreement, and the machine minds of Axis Prime flickered their lights in careful calculation. They had seen this pattern before in younger races, and it always ended the same way, with war and death and the collapse of everything. The Concord had built that they could not simply destroy humanity, because that would make them no better than the monsters they feared. And besides, the humans had done nothing technically wrong, so they created the Crucible commander Elena Vasquez. Received the summons on a cold Tuesday morning aboard the diplomatic station threshold, and she knew before she even opened the message that something bad was coming. She had spent 20 years in the Earth Defense Force and another 10 as a military liaison to the Concord, and she had learned to read the alien races well enough to know when they were planning something. The Veth ambassador greeted her with false warmth as she entered the briefing chamber, and Elena kept her face carefully blank. As she took her seat, Commander Vasquez, the ambassador, said, "Humanity has petitioned for full membership in the Galactic Concord, and we have decided to grant you the opportunity to prove your worthiness." Elena felt ice form in her stomach, because she knew that the Concord never gave anything away for free. "What kind of opportunity?" she asked. Holographic display flickered to life and showed a world of purple forests and orange skies, and Elena felt her blood run cold as she recognized it from classified intelligence reports that A7 was a death world, and everyone who had ever been sent there had died screaming. 100 human volunteers will be placed on the proving world, the ambassador explained, and his crystalline form sparkled with something that might have been anticipation. They will have no weapons and no tools, and no way to call for help, and they must survive for one standard galactic year. Against what? Elena demanded, even though she already knew the answer. The hologram shifted to show the Kreth, and Elena had to force herself not to look away from the nightmare on display. They were 8-limb predators, evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill everything else, and they had risen to the top of that bloody heap through sheer savage efficiency. Each Kreth stood 3 meters tall, with 4 legs for running and 4 arms for killing, and their bodies were covered in armored plates that could stop most projectile weapons. They had no eyes in the way humans understood the term, but instead sensed the world through heat and vibration and chemical signals, and they could track prey across hundreds of kilometers through any terrain. But the worst thing about the Kreth was their intelligence, because they were not mindless beasts but cunning hunters who worked in packs and learned from every kill. The Kreth have tested 7 other species seeking Concord membership, the ambassador said. None have passed. Elena understood then what the Concord was really doing, and she wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. They were not testing humanity at all, but rather trying to break them and prove that humans were nothing more than clever animals who did not deserve place among the stars. And if we refuse, Elena asked, then humanity will be declared unworthy, and your expansion will be limited to your current territories. The ambassador said, permanently. It was not really a choice at all, and everyone in the room knew it. Elena returned to Earth with a heavy heart and delivered her report to the United Nations council and watched as the leaders of humanity debated what to do. Some wanted to fight and others wanted to run, and a few even suggested accepting the Concord terms and giving up on the dream of the stars. But in the end, they did what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. They asked for volunteers. Elena expected a few hundred applications at most, but within a week they had received over 2 million, and she spent long nights reading through the files of people willing to die for the future of their species. She chose carefully because she knew that raw strength would not be enough to survive Theta 7 and that humanity would need every advantage it could find. There were soldiers and scientists and doctors and engineers and hunters and farmers, and each one brought something different to the group. Marcus Chun was a survival instructor who had spent years teaching people how to live off the land in the harshest environments Earth had to offer, and he became the unofficial leader of the expedition. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a xenobiologist who had devoted her life to understanding alien life forms, and she hoped to find some weakness in the Kreth that could be exploited. Sergeant Delia Okonkwo was a Marine veteran who had fought in 3 different colonial conflicts, and she brought the hard edge of combat experience that the group would desperately need. And there were 97 others, each with their own skills and stories and reasons for volunteering to face almost certain death on the day of departure. Elena stood before the assembled volunteers and tried to find words that would give them hope. The Concord thinks they know what we are, she said. They think we are soft and weak and easy to break, but they have never seen what humans can do when we fight for our survival. She looked at the faces before her and saw fear and determination in equal measure, and she knew that she was sending good people to die. You are going into the darkness, she said, but I believe you will find a way to bring back the light. The transport ship carried them away, and Elena watched until it vanished into the void, and then she went back to her quarters and allowed herself to cry for the first time in 20 years. On Theta 7, the Kreth waited in the purple forests and sharpened their claws on ancient trees and sent pheromone signals of anticipation. Through the thick air, new prey was coming, and they were very hungry indeed. The first week on Theta 7 was a nightmare that Marcus Chun would never forget, no matter how long he lived. The transport had dropped them in a clearing at the center of the proving ground, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a single day of peace before the hunting began. Marcus had used those precious hours to organize the survivors into groups and send scouts into the purple forest to find water and shelter and anything that might be used as a weapon. But he had underestimated how fast the Kreth could move and how quickly they would find the human scent. The first attack came at dawn on the second day, when a pack of 5 Kreth burst from the tree line and tore through a group of scouts before anyone could even scream. Marcus heard the sounds of death echoing through the forest, and he ran toward them even though every instinct told him to flee, and by the time he arrived, there was nothing left but blood and scattered equipment. 7 people died in those first terrible minutes, and Marcus learned a lesson that would shape everything that came after. The Kreth were not just predators, but artists of death, who killed with a precision and joy that was almost beautiful in its horror. We cannot fight them head-on, Dr. Yuki Tanaka said as they huddled in a cave that night, listening to hunting calls echo through the darkness. They are faster and stronger and better equipped for violence than we will ever be. Then, what do we do? Someone asked, and Marcus could hear the despair in their voice. We do what humans have always done, Sergeant Delia Okonkwo said, and her eyes gleamed in the firelight with something fierce and unbroken. We adapt, and we learn, and we find a way to turn their strengths against them. Over the following days, Marcus watched his people transform from frightened survivors into something harder and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Yuki spent every waking hour studying the Kreth from a distance and learning their patterns and behaviors and weaknesses, and she discovered things that changed everything they thought they knew about the enemy. The Kreth communicated through pheromones that carried complex messages about territory and prey and pack hierarchy, and Yuki learned to read those chemical signals like a language. She found plants that could mask human scent and others that could mimic the pheromone markers. The Kreth used to mark safe territory, and she taught the others how to use these tools to move. Unseen through the forest, Delia organized the fighters into hunting parties and taught them how to set traps and ambush using nothing but sharpened stones and woven plant fibers, and natural terrain. The Kreth had never faced prey that fought back with intelligence and coordination, and they did not know how to respond when their easy kills became dangerous battles. On the 17th day, Marcus led his first successful ambush against a lone Kreth that had strayed too far from its pack. They used a trail of human scent to lure it into a narrow ravine where escape would be difficult, and then they dropped nets from the trees above and buried it under a rain of heavy stones. Creature fought like a demon even as it died, and it killed 2 more humans before Delia finally drove a sharpened stake through the gap in its armor where the neck met the shoulder. But when it was over, they stood around the massive corpse and felt something they had not felt since arriving on this world. Hope. We can kill them, Marcus said, and his voice carried through the group like electricity. They are not invincible, and they can bleed and die just like anything else. Word spread quickly through the scattered human camps, and survivors who had been hiding in fear began to come together and share what they had learned. Yuki taught them about the pheromones, and Delia taught them about combat, and Marcus taught them about leadership, and slowly the humans of Theta 7 began to change from prey into something else entirely. The Kreth noticed the change too, and for the first time in their long history as apex predators, they began to feel something unfamiliar creeping into their minds. The months, prey was learning too fast and fighting too hard, and the easy hunt they had expected was becoming something far more dangerous. Kith Prime was the largest and oldest of the Kreth on the Proving World, and he had killed more prey species than he could remember across dozens of different hunts. But these humans were different from anything he had ever faced, and he could not understand why they refused to simply die like all the others before them. He watched from the shadows as a group of humans worked together to build a shelter that his claws could not easily breach, and he felt a strange emotion stirring in his chest. It was not fear exactly, but something close to it, and he did not like the feeling at all. They are just prey, he told his pack through pulses of pheromone. We will hunt them and kill them, and feast on their flesh like we always do. But some of the younger Kreth were not so sure, and they had seen their brothers and sisters fall to human traps and human weapons, and they wondered if perhaps this hunt was not going to be as easy as they had been promised on Threshold Station. The observers watched the feeds from Theta 7 with growing unease, and the Veth ambassador found himself unable to look away from the images. They should be broken by now, he said to his aides. Every other species crumbled within the first month, but these humans just keep fighting. Perhaps we underestimated them. One aide suggested perhaps. The ambassador agreed, and for the first time he felt a flicker of doubt about the wisdom of this testback. On the surface, Marcus stood over the body of another fallen Kreth and counted the cost of their growing success. They had lost 31 people in the first month, but they had killed 11 Kreth in return, and the ratio was slowly shifting in their favor. How many of us have to die before we win? Someone asked. As many as it takes, Marcus replied, and he meant every word, because the alternative is extinction, and I will not let that happen to our species. He looked up at the orange sky and thought about Elena and Earth and everyone who was counting on them to survive. They would not let them down. The turning point came on the 112th day when Marcus Chun did something that no prey species had ever done in the history of the Galactic Concord. He sent a message to the Kreth. Yuki had spent months learning the complex pheromone language of the predators, and she had finally figured out how to synthesize the chemical signals using extracts from native plants. The Message was simple and carved into the bark of a territorial marker tree where the Kreth would be sure to find. "It hunt with us and eat well and live." Keth Prime found the message during his morning patrol, and he stood before it for a long time trying to understand what he was. Seeing prey did not send messages to predators, because prey existed only to be hunted and killed and consumed. But these humans kept breaking every rule that Keth Prime had ever learned about the natural order of things. He called his pack together and showed them the message and watched as confusion and anger rippled through their ranks. "It is a trick," one of the older hunters growled. "They want to lure us into a trap." Perhaps, Keth Prime agreed, but perhaps it is something else. He had been watching the humans for months now, and he had seen things that troubled him. Deeply they fought without claws and killed without fangs, and yet, somehow they kept winning against creatures that should have destroyed them easily. They shared food with the weak and protected the injured, and worked together in ways that the Kreth had never imagined possible, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to actually care about each other in ways that went beyond simple pack. Loyal Keth Prime had lost 19 hunters to human traps and ambushes, and he knew that if things continued this way, there would be no Kreth left on Theta 7 by the end of the proving year. "What do you suggest we do?" his second asked. "I suggest we listen to what they have to say," Keth Prime replied. The meeting took place at dawn in a neutral clearing where neither side had any advantage, and Marcus came alone because he knew that showing fear would doom any chance of success. Prime emerged from the trees like a nightmare made flesh, and Marcus had to fight every instinct in his body to stand his ground. "You sent a message," the Kreth said, through a combination of pheromones and gestures that Yuki had taught Marcus to understand. "Why?" "Because I am tired of watching my people die," Marcus replied. "And I think you are tired of watching yours die too." Keth Prime studied the small human before him and tried to understand how such a fragile creature could face him without trembling. "You are prey," he said. "Prey does not negotiate with predators." "Maybe that is the problem," Marcus said. "Maybe. The old ways do not work anymore." He took a step closer to the massive creature and looked up into the sensory pits that served as its eyes. "You are the greatest hunters in the galaxy, and we are the most stubborn survivors," Marcus said. "Imagine what we could do if we worked together instead of against each other." Keth Prime was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see the conflict playing out in the subtle shifts of his body language. The Kreth had been predators for millions of years, and everything in their biology screamed that cooperation with prey was wrong and unnatural. But Keth Prime was also intelligent enough to see the truth that his instincts tried to deny. Humans were winning, and if the Kreth did not change, they would lose everything. "What do you propose?" he asked finally. Marcus smiled and began to explain his vision of a future where humans and Kreth stood together as equals. It took weeks of careful negotiation, and there were setbacks and failures and moments when everything nearly fell apart. Some of the Kreth refused to accept the idea of partnership with prey, and they broke away from the main pack to continue hunting on their own. Some of the humans could not forgive the deaths of friends and family, and they refused to work alongside the creatures that had killed so many of their people. But slowly and painfully, a new kind of relationship began to form between the two species. The younger Kreth were the first to cross the line, and they came to the human camp with offers of fresh kills and knowledge of the forest. In return, the humans shared their fire and their shelters and their strange but effective tools. Yuki worked with Kreth hunters to map the entire proving world and discover resources that neither species could have found alone. Delia trained mixed teams of humans and Kreth to work together in combat, and she found that the combination of human tactics and Kreth strength was devastatingly effective. Marcus watched it all unfold and felt something he had not expected: to feel pride in what they were building together on Threshold Station. The observers had stopped pretending that this was a normal proving test. "This has never happened before," the Veth ambassador said, and his crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated deep distress. "Prey species do not form alliances with predators. Apparently humans do," the UN representative rumbled. "The machine minds of Axis Prime calculated probabilities and ran simulations and came to conclusions that troubled them greatly. If the humans can turn enemies into allies," they said, "then they are far more dangerous than we anticipated, or far more valuable," the UN suggested. "Perhaps we have been looking at this situation incorrectly." The ambassador did not respond, but he could not stop watching the feeds from Theta 7. In the purple forest below, a human child played with a young Kreth, and their laughter mixed with hunting clicks in the warm alien air. Keth Prime watched from a distance and felt something strange and wonderful blooming in his chest. For the first time in his long life, he understood that there might be more to existence than hunting and killing. There might be something called friendship, and he found that he liked the feeling very much. Commander Elena Vasquez had not slept properly in 273 days, and the dark circles under her eyes told a story of her constant worry. Every morning she woke up and checked the feeds from Theta 7, expecting to see the final death of her people, and every morning she was surprised to find them still fighting. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when she walked into the observation room on the 273rd day of the proving year. The purple forests of Theta 7 had changed, and in their place stood something that looked almost like a village. Crude buildings made of fungal wood and strange silk rose from clearings that had been carved from the wilderness, and figures moved between them in patterns of daily life. Some of those figures were human, and some of them were Kreth, and they worked side by side as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Stared at the screen for a long time and tried to understand what she was seeing. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "We have been asking ourselves the same question," the Veth ambassador said from behind her, and Elena turned to face the creature that had sent her people to die. "You designed this test to break Yoses," she said, and her voice was cold with barely contained fury. "You wanted to prove that humans were nothing more than animals." "Yes," the ambassador admitted, and his crystalline form dimmed with something that might have been shame. "We believed that your species was too aggressive and too dangerous to be allowed into the Concord." And now, the ambassador was silent for a moment, and then he gestured toward the screen. "Now, I do not know what to believe," he said. "Your people have done something that we thought was impossible, and they have done it without weapons or technology or any of the advantages that other species relied upon." Elena looked back at the feed and watched as Marcus Chun sat beside a massive Kreth, sharing a meal of roasted meat. The predator that should have killed him months ago now wore a harness decorated with human-made beads, and it looked at Marcus with something that might have been affection. "You do not understand us at all," Elena said. "You thought that strength and violence were all that mattered, but you forgot the thing that makes humans truly dangerous." "And what is that?" Elena smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "We make family out of anything," she said. "Give us enough time and we will turn enemies into friends and strangers into brothers and predators into partners." She turned to face the ambassador fully and saw that other Concord representatives had gathered to listen. "Your test was supposed to prove that humans do not belong among the stars," she said. "Instead, it proved that we belong everywhere because we can adapt to anything and find common ground with anyone." The UN representative rippled with interest, and the machine minds of Axis Prime flickered in rapid calculation. "What are you saying, Commander?" the ambassador asked. "I am saying that the test is over," Elena replied. "We won, but not in the way you expected." She activated her own holographic display and showed the council what her analysts had been piecing together. Over the past months, the humans and Kreth had not just survived together, but had begun building something new and unprecedented. They had developed a shared language that combined human speech with Kreth pheromones, and they used it to coordinate hunting parties and construction projects and social gatherings. They had created tools that neither species could have made alone, combining human ingenuity with Kreth strength and natural materials. They had established rules for living together that respected the needs of both species and allowed them to thrive in ways that neither could have managed separately. "This is not just survival," Elena said. "This is the beginning of a civilization." The ambassador studied the data, and his crystalline body shifted through colors that Elena had never seen before. "You are correct that we did not expect this outcome," he said finally. "We have tested many species with the Kreth, and none of them ever tried to communicate, let alone cooperate. Because they thought like you do," Elena said. "They saw the Kreth as monsters and enemies and threats to be destroyed. But humans looked at them and saw potential allies." She gestured at the feed where Delia Okonkwo was teaching a group of young Kreth how to use spears while a human child rode on the shoulders of an adult predator. "We do not conquer through force alone," Elena said. "We conquer through connection, and we are very, very good at it." The council chamber was silent as the elder races absorbed the implications of what they had witnessed. They had created the crucible to control dangerous species and prevent them from disrupting the order of the galaxy. But they had never imagined that a species might pass the test by changing the rules entirely. "What do you want, Commander?" the UN representative asked Elena. Had thought long and hard about this moment, and she knew exactly what she was going to say. "Full membership in the Galactic Concord," she said. "Not as a junior partner or a species under guidance, but as equals." "That is unprecedented," the ambassador objected. "So is what my people accomplished on Theta 7, Elena replied. "We have earned the right to stand among you, and we will not accept anything less." The debate lasted for hours, and there were objections and arguments and threats from various factions within the Concord. But, in the end, they had no choice, because the humans had proven themselves in the most difficult way possible, and denying them now would only create the enemy that the Concord had feared from the beginning. "Very well," the ambassador said at last. "Humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Concord, effective immediately." Elena nodded and allowed herself a small moment of triumph before asking the question that really mattered. "And the Kreth who chose to stand with us?" The ambassador hesitated, and Elena could see the calculation in his crystalline depths. "They will be returned to their homeworld," he said. "This was an aberration, and they must be separated from your influence." "No," Elena said, and her voice was hard as steel. "They are part of us now, and we do not abandon family." The chamber erupted in protest, but Elena stood her ground and refused to back down. The end, it was Keth Prime himself who settled the argument. Great Hunter had been watching the proceedings through a communication link, and he chose this moment to speak for the first time. "We have made our choice," he said in the strange hybrid language that the two species had created together. "We stand with the humans now and forever." His words echoed through the chamber and silenced every objection. The Concord had no answer for loyalty, freely given, and in the end they were forced to accept what they could not change. Humanity had passed the test, and they had brought the predators with them. The 365th day dawned bright and clear over Theta 7 and Marcus. Chum stood at the edge of the settlement watching the sun rise over the purple forests. 1 year had passed since he and 99 other humans had been dropped onto this world to die, and so much had changed that he barely recognized his own life anymore. 63 humans had survived the proving year, and they had lost friends and family and parts of themselves that could never be recovered. But they had also gained something precious and unexpected. They had gained the Kreth. 19 of the original 40 predators had chosen to join the human pack, and they had fought and bled and built alongside their former prey until the distinction no longer mattered. Now they stood together as the transport ships descended from orbit, and Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions churning in his chest relief. That the test was finally over, and pride in what they had accomplished, and fear of what came next. Commander Elena Vasquez was the first person off the lead transport, and she walked across the clearing toward Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "You actually did it. We did it together," Marcus replied, and he gestured at the settlement behind him. "All of us." Elena looked past them at the strange community they had built, and she saw humans and Kreth working side by side, as if this was how things had always been. Children played in the streets, and hunters prepared for the morning patrol, and builders worked on expanding the shelters that had grown from desperate refuges into permanent homes. The Concorde offered to evacuate everyone, Elena said. They want to relocate the Kreth to a reserve world and bring the humans back to Earth. Marcus shook his head before she even finished speaking. "This is our home now," he said. "We built it with our blood and sweat, and we are not leaving." "I told them you would say that," Elena said, and she smiled through her tears. "So I negotiated something better." She explained that Theta 7 would be recognized as the first joint human Kreth colony, and that both species would share equal rights and responsibilities in governing the new world, the Galactic. Concorde had not been happy about the arrangement, but they had been forced to accept it because the alternative was too dangerous to contemplate. If humanity could turn the Kreth into allies, then what else might they accomplish if pushed into a corner? "There is something else," Elena said, and her expression grew more serious. "The Concorde wants to know what you plan to do next." Marcus thought about the question for a long time before answering. He looked at the settlement they had built from nothing in the family they had forged from enemies, and he felt the weight of possibility pressing down on his shoulders. "We are going to change everything," he said finally. Over the following months, the colony on Theta 7 grew and evolved in ways that no one had predicted. Human engineers worked with Kreth craftsmen to develop new technologies that combined the best of both species, and the results were remarkable ships that could travel faster than anything the Concorde had ever built, and weapons that could defend against any threat, and tools that made impossible tasks simple. But more important than the technology was the culture they created together. Humans taught the Kreth about art and music and storytelling, and the predators discovered that there were pleasures in life beyond the hunt. The Kreth taught humans about patience and awareness and respect for the natural world, and the colonists learned to see their environment as a partner rather than an enemy. Children grew up speaking both languages and moving between both cultures as easily as breathing, and they saw no contradiction in being both human and Kreth in their hearts. Kith Prime became the first Kreth to formally adopt a human family, and he raised Marcus and Yuki's children as his own alongside the young of his species. Delia trained the first generation of mixed species warriors, and they became legendary throughout the galaxy for their skill and loyalty and unbreakable bonds. The Galactic Concorde watched all of this with growing unease, and they began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had designed a test to prove that humanity was too dangerous for the stars, and instead they had created something far more threatening than they had ever imagined. A species that could turn enemies into friends, was not bound by the same limitations as other races, and their potential for growth was essentially unlimited. "What do we do about them?" the Veth ambassador asked during an emergency session of the council. "I suggest we do nothing," the UN representative replied, "because anything we try to do will only make them stronger. The machine minds have access." Prime agreed, and they recommended a policy of careful observation and cautious engagement. But some within the Concorde were not satisfied with waiting and watching, and they began to plot against the human Kreth alliance. They did not understand that the predators had made their choice, and that nothing in the galaxy would make them abandon their new pack when the first assassination attempt came on the 5th anniversary of the colony's founding. It was a Kreth warrior who saved Elena's life. She had been walking through the market when a cloaked figure raised a weapon, and the Kreth moved faster than thought to intercept the blast. The warrior died in Elena's arms, and his last words were a message for Marcus. "Tell him that family protects family," the Kreth said. "Tell him that we have no regrets." Elena delivered the message herself, and she watched as Marcus wept for a creature that should have been his enemy. "They will never understand us," Marcus said through his tears. "They think we are weak because we care about each other, but that is exactly what makes us strong." He stood before the assembly of humans, and Kreth and he spoke words that would echo through history. "The Galactic Concord tried to break us, and they failed," he said. "They tried to divide us, and they failed, and now they are trying to destroy us, and they will fail at that too." He raised his hand, and beside him, Keth Prime raised his massive claw, and their species stood together as one. "We are not just allies anymore," Marcus declared. "We are family, and family does not break, and family does not surrender, and family does not give up on each other." The crowd roared its approval, and the sound carried across the colony and into the stars beyond. The Galactic Concord had created the crucible to control dangerous species and prevent them from disrupting the order of the galaxy. But they had not counted on human stubbornness and human compassion and human refusal to accept that anything was impossible. They had designed a test to break humanity, and the predators had other plans. Now those predators stood shoulder to shoulder with the species they had been meant to destroy, and together they looked toward a future that belonged to them both. The test was over, and humanity had only just begun.